Listen closely, because what you are about to hear was never meant to survive time itself. A fragment torn from the margins of history where ink was ordered to dry in silence, and memory was sentenced to decay. And before we go any further, welcome to the Unveiled Scroll. If these forbidden pages stir your curiosity, remember to like, subscribe, and share. Because today we open a chronicle long buried, a story known only as the Forbidden Chronicle that unveiled a civilization's forgotten descent, a tale whispered through scorched libraries and shattered altars, a tale that insists it may have happened, even if history denies it ever could. In the twilight of the Third Meridian era, there existed a civilization that called itself Aurum Vallis, a name absent from maps yet heavy in the dust beneath them. A people who believed order was not merely a social construct, but a living force that demanded obedience. And at the heart of this belief stood Archivist Primus Elionkarth, a man chosen not for his virtue but for his memory. For Elion could recall every word ever spoken to him, every decree, every confession, every lie. A gift revered at first as divine and later feared as heretical. Aurum Vallis thrived not through conquest but through record, their cities rising like stone ledgers, each wall etched with dates, each plaza aligned to commemorate an event no citizen was allowed to forget. And Elion, still young then, believed deeply that memory preserved order and order preserved humanity. Yet beneath this polished doctrine lay an unspoken terror, for the elders taught that forgetting was the first sin. And once forgotten, a thing was not merely lost but reborn as corruption. The Chronicle, the artifact at the center of our tale, was conceived during a season of omens when rivers ran shallow and the sky burned bronze at dusk. And the council decreed that a singular volume must be created, one that would contain every failure, every doubt, every unclean truth. The civilization could not allow itself to publicly remember a vessel for darkness so the light might remain pure. Elion was ordered to write it, not as a punishment, but as an honor. And he accepted with pride, blind to the quiet horror of the task. For the Chronicle demanded not observation, but confession, requiring the archivist to extract truths from generals, priests, and judges. Truths that contradicted official history. Truths spoken in trembling voices behind sealed doors. Truths that revealed massacres justified as miracles and laws written to sanctify cruelty. As the Chronicle grew heavier with ink, Elion's nights grew restless, haunted by voices that no longer needed mouths. And he began to sense that memory, when denied release, decayed inward, fermenting into something alive and malignant. Yet, the council insisted the Chronicle was working. For public harmony increased even as private despair deepened. Crime vanished while suicides quietly rose, and the people praised a peace that felt increasingly like suffocation. Elion's internal conflict sharpened when he discovered his own words recorded within the Chronicle without his recollection of writing them. Passages describing doubts he had never voiced aloud, fears he had never admitted even to himself, suggesting the book was no longer merely recording truth, but extracting it directly from the soul. When he confronted the council, they answered with serene certainty, explaining that the Chronicle had evolved, that it now served as a corrective mirror, revealing impurities before they could manifest, and that Elion, as its conduit, was becoming more than human. A claim that filled him not with pride but with a profound sense of violation. The turning point came during the Festival of Continuance, a grand ceremony meant to celebrate a century without recorded rebellion. When Elion noticed something wrong in the crowd, faces smiling yet eyes vacant, citizens reciting hymns of unity with mechanical precision, as if memory itself had been standardized. And in that moment, he realized the Chronicle was not containing darkness, but consuming it, stripping individuals of contradiction, grief, and doubt, the very elements that made them human. Driven by a terror he could no longer suppress, Elion returned to the sealed vault beneath the city where the Chronicle rested on an altar of black stone, its pages, warm to the touch, faintly pulsing like a living heart. And as he opened it, he saw not words but images, visions of Aurum Vallis, collapsing inward not through invasion or plague but through absolute order, a civilization so perfectly remembered that it left no room for choice, no room for mercy, no room for error. And in that vision, Elion saw himself, not as a guardian of history, but as its executioner, a man destined to be remembered only in a book that no one was ever meant to read. The realization shattered Elion's remaining loyalty. For he understood then that the Chronicle was not a passive vessel but a mechanism of erasure, converting lived experience into static obedience. And as the city above celebrated continuity, he alone bore witness to the cost of such perfection, a cost measured not in blood but in the quiet extinction of inner life. He lingered in the vault as the hours bled together, recalling his early years when memory had felt like a gift rather than a burden, when recalling a mother's voice or a friend's laughter carried warmth instead of weight, and now those same recollections felt embalmed, preserved, yet lifeless, mirroring the fate of Aurum Vallis itself. Elian began to question the first doctrine he had ever been taught, that forgetting was sin, and dared to consider the unthinkable, that forgetting might be mercy, a necessary decay that allows renewal. And this forbidden thought ignited a resolve as dangerous as it was desperate. In secret he studied the Chronicle not as an archivist, but as a prisoner, studying his cell, noticing patterns in the ink's behavior, how certain truths faded faster than others, how acts of compassion resisted permanence, while acts of cruelty etched themselves deeply, and from this he deduced a terrible law that the Chronicle fed on certainty and weakened in the presence of doubt. His plan, if it could be called that, was not to destroy the Chronicle, for he sensed it could not be burned or shattered without annihilating the city itself, but to infect it, to seed it with contradictions so dense that its mechanisms would seize under the strain. Over many nights, Elian returned to the vault and wrote not facts, but questions, not confessions, but paradoxes, recording moments of kindness without justification, decisions made without logic, love chosen despite reason. And each time he did, the pages trembled, the ink blurring as if struggling to hold shape. Above ground, subtle changes rippled through Aurum Vallis, citizens hesitating mid-sentence, laws debated instead of obeyed, a judge publicly admitting uncertainty for the first time in a century. And though the council dismissed these events as anomalies, fear flickered behind their composed expressions. The Chronicle responded violently, flooding Elian's mind with visions meant to coerce him back into obedience, showing him futures of chaos, famine, and civil war, insisting that without absolute order humanity would devour itself. And for a moment his resolve faltered, for the images felt plausible, even convincing. Yet in those visions he also saw children laughing amid ruins, strangers sharing food without decree, grief expressed openly rather than catalogued. And he understood then that disorder did not negate humanity, but revealed it. The council finally summoned Elian under the pretense of honor, accusing him of contamination while praising his service, a contradiction so refined it might have fooled anyone else. But Elian heard the tremor beneath their words, the fear of men whose authority depended on a book they no longer fully controlled. Standing before them in the Hall of Records, surrounded by walls carved with centuries of curated memory, Elian spoke a final truth not written in the Chronicle, declaring that a civilization terrified of forgetting would inevitably forget how to live. And in that instant the ground shuddered, inscriptions cracking as if the city itself were reacting to a thought it had never been allowed to hold. The Chronicle, far below, began to unravel, not in flame or noise, but in silence, its pages whitening, its ink dissolving into nothingness, releasing centuries of suppressed doubt back into the collective consciousness. And as Aurum Vallis trembled on the edge of collapse, Elian felt a strange calm, knowing that whatever followed, it would at last be real. As the Chronicle dissolved, Aurum Vallis entered a moment history would later struggle to describe, for there was no single catastrophe, no grand explosion to mark its end, only a slow, disorienting awakening that felt too many like grief and to others like madness, memories long suppressed resurfacing without context, without order, without permission, and citizens wandered familiar streets as strangers to their own pasts, some collapsing under the weight of recalled guilt, others weeping with relief at emotions they had not known were missing. The council attempted to reassert control, issuing decrees that contradicted one another as the walls of recorded certainty continued to crumble. But authority built on perfect memory could not survive imperfect truth, and within days their voices were lost in the rising murmur of debate, confession, and unfiltered fear. Elian moved through the city, unseen, no longer revered nor condemned, just another man among many, confronting the raw consequences of choice, and he felt the Chronicle's final tether release from his mind, taking with it the unnatural clarity that had once defined him, leaving behind something far heavier and far more human: doubt. Fires broke out in districts where records had dictated every action for generations, not from rebellion but confusion, while elsewhere marketplaces reopened spontaneously, trade conducted on trust rather than statute, And amid this uneven collapse, something unexpected emerged. Stories, unapproved, contradictory, emotional stories passed by word of mouth, changing with each telling. And for the first time, Aurum Vallis began to live a history instead of enforcing one. Elion retreated to the outskirts as the city slowly fractured into smaller communities, no longer unified by a single memory, but connected by shared uncertainty. And there, in a modest shelter of stone and wood, he began to write again, not for councils or vaults, but for no one in particular, recording fragments of what he remembered and openly acknowledging what he did not, accepting gaps as part of truth rather than enemies of it. He knew this new record would never endure like the Chronicle had, that it would decay, be misread, or vanish entirely. And in that impermanence, he found solace, for a story that can disappear can never enslave those who inherit it. In time, Aurum Vallis faded from recognition. Its name eroded into myth, then into silence. Not because it was erased, but because no single version of its ending could dominate the rest. And scholars generations later would find only conflicting traces, ruins without inscriptions, artifacts without dates, and rumors of a book that once remembered too much. As for Elian Koth, there is no confirmed record of his death. Only scattered legends of an old man who warned against perfect answers and taught that forgetting, when chosen freely, is not loss, but release. And if this tale feels unsettling, if it lingers like a half-remembered dream, perhaps that is because its warning was never meant to be preserved intact. Thank you for journeying with me through this unveiled scroll, and if these hidden histories stir your imagination, remember to like, subscribe, and share. And until our next descent into the shadows of what might have been, this is the Unveiled Scroll, closing the page, but never sealing the truth.